am in Frederick, Maryland. I'm the Executive Director of Advanced Biofuels USA, which is a nonprofit educational organization here in Frederick. It's, let me move this like that. Let me see a little better. Here's our purpose. I'm going to go very quickly through these slides, but let's start with, what do you think of when you hear bioenergy or renewable energy? Do you think about energy for transportation? That's basically what we're going to talk about. Advanced Biofuels USA, we started almost 14 years ago. Before that, I worked on Capitol Hill. I have a law degree from GW, but I did healthcare law, healthcare risk management, and focused on nursing homes. So this is, I tell the students that I work with, and Justin will tell you this, where we get to is not a straight line. So now here I am. The answer to the questions you all were answering before was, what did I do? I prepared this presentation for you. So ethanol is usually what people think of when they think of renewable fuels or biofuel, but there are other things. What we're going to talk about a little bit is how can, we talked about what have you done this week. So I'm going to give you some ideas, or what you have done this month, of what you can do. I'm going to mostly talk about the second one on the list, decreasing your fossil-based fuel use, but a little bit on the third one as well. So what are biofuels? What are renewable fuels, which is what I prefer calling them, and you'll see why. So what are they? Like we talked about, ethanol. Ethanol is a biofuel. It's not the only one. There's all of these other things that we can bioize. You probably, sustainable aviation fuel has been in the news a lot, but there's anything that's fuel we should be able to getting off of our petroleum and natural gas and renewabling it. You'll hear about first generation, second, third, fourth generation. First generation is usually thought of as corn-based ethanol, sugar cane, soybeans, things like that, whose primary purpose is thought of as food. When we talk about this, though, there's other things about ethanol to just know. You can use ethanol today. We all use it. You put gasoline in your car, 10% of it is renewable, as ethanol. Mostly because that ethanol replaces MTBE, which was a carcinogen that was banned in lots of states. And people might not realize sometimes the ethanol that's in your car is that same ethanol that's in your wine, your beer, your whiskey. Like I say, talk about the 4 generations. What are advanced biofuels used for? In history, the first Model Ts were built to run on ethanol, which, if you think about it, makes sense because there weren't gas stations on every corner, but everybody could make ethanol. So you would be able to fuel your car renewably and with the stuff that you used to use to feed your horses. So that was the idea, was that it was going to be a very distributed resource. And then the first diesels ran on peanut oil. Like I said, we started using ethanol to replace MTBE. MTBE was used to replace lead. So to get the lead out, we put in MTBE. To get the MTBE out, we put in ethanol. It also is very high octane, so you get higher performance. And then other biofuels that we use are low sulfur diesels. So the renewable diesels fit in well with our working toward reducing the other pollutants that are in in our fuels. How do we use them today? Racing. NASCAR uses E15. The Formula One is really where the innovations are happening now. And aviation. I think it's Netherlands, the airport in Amsterdam has a little bit of, it started having a little bit of renewable fuel in every flight. There's not that much made yet, so it gets sort of spread out. But there's definitely commercial flights that are using renewable fuels, and some small airports are also getting, especially in California, are getting deliveries. Buses, we use it on buses. The chart there shows you how much of an improvement over petroleum, diesel, a renewable natural gas can be. And we use it in trucks, renewable diesel, biodiesel. We're starting to get to use it in trains with diesel technology, diesel engine trains. And then if you have a flex fuel vehicle, you can use up to 85% renewable. Your car will have something like that on it, or you can see in the your owner's manual. We retrofitted my 2002 Ford Focus to be able to use E85. And also there are trucks, a lot of the manufacturers of diesel engines are warranting them up to 20% of biodiesel. But if you have renewable diesel, you can use 100%. And how do you find your E85? There's an app for that. The other thing is maritime fuels. This is becoming really important because the International Maritime Organization has regulations against sulfur, and using renewable fuels can address that need to get rid of the sulfur in your fuels. So there's a lot of interest in that use. There's military interest, although a few years ago there was more interest than there has been recently. However, with the price of gas, the price of oil going up, the government will buy renewable fuel for the military if it meets mil spec and is at a competitive price with petroleum fuel. And with the price of oil going up, they may be using more than they were. Although California, because of their laws and regulations, is really soaking up most of the renewable diesel and jet fuel. Can also use it for heating oil. New York and some of the Northeast states are really getting into requiring some portion of the heating oil to be renewable. And then a lot of people don't think about this, but cook stoves. In parts of the world where you use dung or wood to cook, and that has lots of smoke and harmful health effects, replacing that with a clean burning fuel like ethanol is really important. And so there's a organization called Project Gaia that's actually headquartered up in Gettysburg that does a lot of work with the United Nations on that. What is it used for today? Like I said, California soaks up a lot of the advanced biofuels. And you can see on that chart that there is most of the reduction in their carbon footprint is due to renewable diesel, biodiesel, and ethanol. Electricity is growing, but there's still a lot, most of the electricity is still not renewable. So tomorrow, what will it be used for? We can talk about fuel cells, electricity through fuel cells in cars, and with the hydrogen or ethanol being used as the hydrogen carrier. And advanced engines, E30 now it can be the sweet spot in engines. And like I said, there's our old Focus that was being retrofitted. And what about taking your vacation in space? There is work being done on rocket fuel and making rocket fuel also a lot less carbon intensive than it is, and with missiles, and that's where some of the military use of renewable fuels will be. So how are they made? The main things, but the main point is that if we're going to get off of petroleum and off of fossil natural gas, it's going to be agriculture, forestry, aquaculture, and waste management. That is where we're going to have to be finding our energy. And the point that we try to make is not, I don't like policies that are all of the above. I want all of the above ground. I want to be recycling the carbon that we already have taken out of deep storage. So how are we going to do that? Here is a list of some of the things that you can use to make renewable fuels. But this is not fun to look at a list, so we're going to look at a lot of pretty pictures. So you've got grains like sorghum, or we've got soybeans, and you've got oil seed crops like sunflowers, or what do they call artichoke, Jerusalem artichokes, and canola, carnata, camelina, pennycress. A lot of these can be winter crops or cover crops, and or rotation crops. So you can help do your regenerative agricultural practices by using some things that you can also will be able to have a market for. And grasses. One of the things about grasses is it might also be planted as erosion control, because look at those wonderful roots. Energy tobacco that's being researched down in Virginia. Quinaf, agave, depends on where you are in the world on what is the appropriate feedstock. Cassava, or these different oil seed trees, jatropha, moringa, pangamia, castor bean, jojoba, neem. And what was a few years ago a very popular idea was making renewable fuels out of algae and or other aquatic things like duckweed or seaweed. And this picture is the idea of making growing algae as part of a wastewater treatment process. And there's a lot of work being done on that. Agricultural waste and residues like corn stover and corn cobs, sugarcane bagasse. The leftovers when you make table sugar out of sugar beets or sugar cane, what's left over to be able to make it. And then there are beets as a energy crop, and that research, the pictures from that research there are from University of Maryland Eastern Shore a few years ago. And also other agricultural waste. I was amazed to know that there is what they call this cashew apple on every cashew, and that is all agricultural waste. So in Tanzania, they're working on trying to ferment that and make ethanol out of it. And then you've got other kinds of date palm seeds, things like that. And here's more research that's also being done in Maryland. The far right is again at University of Maryland Eastern Shore. They are looking at different. They planted 50 different kinds of cannabis, of hemp for CBD, and to see what is going to grow in this more humid, hot environment, and what kind of pests are there, and what do they have to be looking at to develop a hemp or cannabis industry here in Maryland. So the research that's being done is taking that residues, because you only use the buds. You only use the buds if you're going to make your medical or recreational marijuana, or you only use the buds for your CBD oils. So the whole rest of that plant is available to convert to the building blocks of fuels and chemicals, and replacing petroleum and natural gas. And that research is being done at Hood College, at UMES, and at Ohio State, a group that is working on that research. Nutshells, rice, wheat straw, all these agricultural or forestry residues, the sawdust, or growing crops specifically for as energy crops, either for pelletizing for heat and power, or for renewable fuels. And waste, your municipal solid waste, food waste, distillers waste, brewers waste. We've got a lot of that around here in Maryland, and using that. And you probably have heard about used cooking oils, fats, and greases. This picture in the middle is in Spain, in Valencia, Spain, where they are doing neighborhoods, have places where you can take your used cooking oil, and then it will be collected and then turned into renewable fuels, or added for animal feed. And this picture down here on the right is what they call a fatberg in the UK, where people have thrown their used cooking oil into the sewers instead, and you get these horrible, awful clogs. So making renewable fuels out of it would be a better idea. Tannery waste, landfill gas or biogas from animal waste and food processing. Flue gas, recycled plastic and tires, municipal waste, carbon capture and reuse, and all of these different things to go through a process and make renewable fuels. And here's another reason I like calling it renewable fuels. We've got hydrogen. Hydrogen can, like we said, fuel cells and use hydrogen, or green ammonia for maritime, particularly for maritime things. And then I don't know if you can see, but my renewable hydrogen plus captured carbon dioxide, you can then make renewable fuels out of that. And then you don't have just the fuels. You are either the fuels, as we've talked about, could be a co-product to something else, or as you make the fuels, you have animal feed and other co-products that come with it. So you're not just making one thing most of the time, you're making a number of things: biochar, fertilizer, and feed. We put together this sustainability criteria chart because different things are going to have different sustainability profiles. So it's a balancing act. And how do you get the best out of what you have available? On logistics, you've got to move this stuff around. You've got to harvest it. You've got to store it. You've got, when you make the fuel out of it, you've got to move that around. You have to, you're collecting grease. You've got to move your grease around to get it to where you're going to turn it into fuel. And if you're capturing that carbon, if any of you have made beer or wine, you know that you get carbon dioxide as it ferments. And at these big ethanol refineries, they have lots of carbon dioxide. They can sell it for putting in beverages, for medical uses, for food processing stuff, but they can also make enough to store it underground, to capture it and store it. And there is a facility in Illinois that is doing that now. Technology. You got lots and lots of feedstocks. You have lots of different ways to deal with them, to convert them into your building blocks of your fuels or chemicals and everything that you get out of your fossil. If you're making jet fuel, this is to just assure you that there is a long process between making the fuel and getting it approved for use. And this is generally a depiction of the process that has to go through. What we've talked about here is generally when we talk about biofuels, talk about it starts with something living. There's a process that it's going to go through to take that apart. And then there's other processes that it's going to go through to put it back together to make our final products. But it's not all bio, like we said. So some of them are going to be e-fuels. So you might have electrolysis where where your water is basically your feedstock, and that's where you get your hydrogen. You can also get hydrogen from bio sources, like from biogas that we talked about, the landfill gas and things like that. But a lot of time water is going to be your feedstock for making hydrogen. And then, like I said, you connect it to CO2 from various sources to make some of your fuels. And here are a list of some of the fuels that would be included in as an e-fuel or electrofuel. And then there's recycling plastics. And I think there's some interesting sustainability conversations to have about this. Recycling plastics into plastics or recycling plastics into fuels. If all the plastics were bioplastics, putting them into fuels wouldn't be such a big deal. But is plastic sort of a way of sequestering carbon? And so should we just keep that plastics staying plastics, just keep recycling plastics into more plastics? We've all got computers, they're plastic. We're not going to live without plastic. Green ammonia, like I said, for maritime fuel. And then why are they important? They're important because this is what we have. And this is what we could have instead. Eventually, if we keep going as we are going to have peak oil. But if we stop using petroleum, we may never reach peak oil, and that's going to be just fine. The other thing is, before that oil runs out, it becomes more difficult and dangerous to extract. And this is where I'll take a moment to remember the 11 people who died because we're using oil. And we don't use oil to produce electricity in the US, very little. So wind and solar aren't going to replace oil, especially here. Where does our electricity come from here in Maryland? It comes from all of these fossil sources and nuclear. There's just this little bit that's hydropower and renewables. So we need to replace all of this green, yellow, and dark green part with renewables as soon as we can. If the electricity projections don't come out the way that we think they will, this is really, really essential. Even if they do come out the way we think they will, and even if this electricity turns into renewable electricity, we still have a lot of liquid fuel here that we're going to be using, and that should be renewable. And then there's the geopolitical issues. Some of you may not be excuse me, old enough to remember the gas shortages in the 70s. If you're not making your own fuel, somebody else can control you, and just ask the folks in Europe with what's going on with Russia. And I said before about MTBE, a bunch of states banned it, and so ethanol was used as a cleaner replacement. Maryland is very famous in this because there's two big lawsuits about the water table that was damaged from MTBE leaking out of gas station tanks. And I think that the people in those areas are still getting bottled water. An ethanol molecule is a really, really useful molecule for addressing a lot of these things that we talked about. It's got high octane, and it can replace the MTBE and perform as a wonderful fuel. Now, it isn't as dense as petroleum fuel, so you'll lose mileage, but like I put before, there are engine developments that are being worked on to build engines that are designed for high octane, which can be provided by ethanol and other things, instead of trying to use ethanol in engines that are designed to optimize gasoline. And again, it's replacing it is important because we want to just keep recycling what is already out of deep storage. And then, as I sort of mentioned with the fat burn, there's all these ancillary benefits that come with converting to an agriculture, forestry, waste management based way to fuel and power ourselves instead of petroleum and natural gas. You guys know this stuff, but I thought I needed to mention it, the three-legged stool of sustainability. And none of this is going to happen unless everybody in the value chain can make a living, at least make a living. And it's got to be environmentally sustainable, or that's not worth doing. And it has to fit into the social fabric of whatever, wherever you're doing it, whatever you're doing. And some policy considerations. Some years ago, there was a great daily show where all of the presidents, these 8 presidents, and now I suppose we could add some to it, all said we're going to get off our addiction to oil. And we're still working on it. The policy that was developed back in 2005 and then 2007 is Renewable Fuel Standard, is the federal policy. We've definitely reached the corn ethanol limits there. The advanced ethanol, or the advanced fuels piece, like you can see from my presentation, we've got it. It's not impossible, it's possible, but it's just not as easy as they thought it would be. And again, California is doing it. European Union's called the Renewable Energy Directive. And there's biofuels mandates around the world, which I would say are more aspirational, again, because it's more difficult than we thought. Sort of various policy considerations, things that are trying to be used to address the problems that we've been talking about. And then again, so ideas for what you can do in your own life. There are funds that you can put into if you're going to be flying, so that you can not just offset, but actually finance the development of renewable fuels, so that that fuel actually in that plane will soon not be petroleum, but soon will be renewable. And personally, if the fuel book used, if I find it somewhere, if you want to, you can, if your car is out of warranty, you can retrofit it. I have and I put in the chat the link to this how to defossilize your fleet, which has ideas for if you're part of a sustainability program at a business or at a government, and what you can do there. And again, encourage your family, your friends to do the same. You can use our website as a resource. These are things that as you go down the right margin of the site, here's what you'll see. Again, we've got some videos. Our Earth Day 2021, we did 22 days of what can you do, what can individuals do to reduce their carbon footprint. And then there's ready for questions.
Well, thank you, Joanne. Yeah, so we'll open it up for questions now. I'd like to ask the first, if that's okay.
Sure.
So you went through a lot of different sources of biofuel. Do you have a table showing how much net carbon is sequestered or lost for each type and what the net energy yield is? And then another factor to consider is how much land and water is required where fuel is the main product rather than a byproduct like hemp waste or the use of something that would otherwise be thrown away like used cooking oil. So yeah, carbon, land, water, and net energy yield.
There is a program developed by Department of Energy's national, one of the national laboratories, the Argonne National Lab up by Illinois, and it's called GREET. And I can never remember what it's like. But it's a model, and you put in all of those things that you just mentioned and more. How far is your feedstock coming from? What is it? What is it that your transportation costs? What are your it's just incredibly complex. California, for figuring out their carbon credits and who's getting what, they use a California version of that GREET model. So it's pretty much an industry standard. There are a few other models that are used in other places in the world, but that's really the basic one. So say you're an ethanol, and everybody has to do their own. So if you're an ethanol, a biorefinery, and you're using wind power and solar power to run your refinery, your carbon footprint is going to be a whole lot less than somebody down the street that's getting their electricity from coal. So all of that is done really very individually to figure out what that carbon that you're doing, and then what is your that you get a carbon intensity value put on it. So yeah, that is.
Would you mind sharing a link to the standard that you just mentioned?
Sure, I will do that.
Martha has her virtual hand raised while you're doing that.
I feel very proud of myself that I figured out how to raise my hand. I cannot tell you how many Zoom meetings I have been on. I mean, we've all been on countless Zoom meetings, and I'm always putting up the hand wave thing. And I'm always like, why do they have like the cool, like raise your hand one? So anyway, I am so proud of myself that I actually found the little tab at the bottom there. So thank you for recognizing my raised hand. Joanne, thank you very much for your presentation. Gave us a lot to think about. Something that comes to my mind, and I wonder if you could just add something. My main concern about biofuels is in terms of the input, all of the inputs, if they go to scale, would require monoculture agriculture, which I think results in a lot of biodiversity loss and a lot of deforestation, again, in painting with a very broad brush, that when we're making the balancing the good or the positive and negative effects of any of the solutions to trying to get off of fossil fuels. To me, the real challenge with biofuels is, again, if we're going to do this on a massive scale, I worry that it's going to encourage another form of kind of extractive, exploitive capitalism where you just have massive, biofuel farms, which destroys forests, kind of wrecks the soil. So I also have read a little bit of some of the mitigating things you can do, the way you organize the agriculture and all of that. But do you have just anything, what would your comments be about that aspect and the, both the loss of biodiversity and the loss of forest?
I think there's two things. One sort of goes back to that GREET model and that figuring out what your carbon intensity number is, because the more that you get away from that, the more that you get toward using agricultural residues, using waste, those numbers then are higher or lower, because what you want is a low carbon intensity number, right? So those are the numbers that are lower. And so those numbers, then the other piece of it is being that we're a capitalist market-based society, and so you can't get policies through unless they're market-based these days. There's carbon markets, and what your value is on the carbon market is measured by how low that carbon intensity number is. So if you can lower that carbon intensity number, if you can use more waste, if you can use more like anaerobic digestion of food wastes or of dairy manure, which has that other benefit of nutrient management, because dairy manure has to do a whole lot of stuff to keep that out of the bay, basically, or whatever body of water is near you. So instead of just having these lagoons and then putting manure on fields, if you can take that where you're going to get your methane is going to go into the air anyway, then you get a really, really low number. So currently here, we're pushing those issues that you identified in this market-based system. Other places are doing mandates and sustainability certifications, and that's another way of doing it. And those sustainability certifications, they include labor issues, not just environmental stuff. So they Roundtable on RSB, Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, is an international one, and they train auditors that go out and certify different feedstocks. And so again, the certification that you get through these third-party auditor things are what will give you the ability to participate in some of the mandated things, like the EU has that renewable energy directive, and it has all of these qualifications that you aren't counted as complying with the law unless you meet these qualifications. And to show that you meet the qualifications, you go through the sustainability audit.
So Paul was next.
We can't hear you.
Paul, you're muted.
I didn't see. Yeah, I'm usually better at that. Anyway, thanks for your talk and everything. While you were talking, you mentioned a couple times it has taken longer than we thought to develop this or that technology. And as you were saying that, I was thinking that on the outside, we have about 10 years to make really fundamental changes in our carbon emissions. And we know that I have solar on my roof, and I have 2 electric cars that are 9 and 10 years old. So we know that technology exists. We know we can scale it up. All the auto manufacturers are going that way. Well, how would you argue that we should depend on multiple technologies, like switchgrass is a different technology than beets, all of which need to be successful to reduce our carbon emissions in time? Or should we just go electric? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that that image that I had there of, even if we go electric, we're still going to have lots of liquid fuels that we need to replace. And so we just need to. So they're going to be there. They should not be petroleum. When I said it was harder than we thought it was going to be, it's basically, how do you break? There's something that I love this term, biomass recalcitrance. It's like you have a 2-year-old that won't go to bed. And that's what the feedstock is like. Who's the microbiologist here? Because that's where the work is being done, a lot of it. I had 2 lists when I had the technologies. I used to describe them as, one is the seductive and one is the bullying. The one is enzymatic and things that are at normal temperatures and pressures, things like fermentation. But what we need to do is find out how to ferment those parts that didn't used to ferment. What enzymes can we find that will break those down into sugars that can then be used to ferment or to use for other things? And that's where the research has, for various reasons that I could probably talk about 2 hours on, but let's say there's policy related reasons, there's reasons of, the oil companies don't want to give up market, so they're not been funding stuff like this. But now people have put their own blood, sweat, and tears into this, into even not being funded, doing some of this work. And so when you said it's the switchgrass or the energy beets, that's exactly the research that's being done at Hood College, is developing the enzymes that can break down that biomass in the energy beets. Now, they don't have much of what's called lignin because they grow underground. They don't need the stuff that holds a tree up, or that holds that grass up. But now they have taken that technology that they worked on for those energy beets and are applying it to the stalks and leaves of the hemp and cannabis. So they've learned over these years how to do that, and are really perfecting those techniques. Or you have other things like gasification and pyrolysis. And now you're getting the oil companies, now that price of oil has gone up, they're getting interested again, and they're putting more money into it. And they're realizing that they're going to have to do this transition. And so they're starting to look at how can we take some of that forest waste and pyrolyze it into oils where they're comfortable making jet fuel and renewable diesel out of oils. But there's also a company which is led by a woman, by the way, called LanzaTech, that has a spin-off, LanzaJet. And they are taking the industrial waste gas or syngas from other a gasification process, using a microbiology process, microbes, and that make ethanol, and then from that ethanol making jet fuel. And so
Joanne, we're starting to run overtime, so we have 3 more people who want to ask questions. So I'm going to ask that you all be as concise as possible so that we can get through the rest of our agenda. But I would like everyone to be able to ask their questions. Just be as concise as possible with the questions and answers. Dave Arndt.
So thanks, Joanne. You mentioned really about 30 different technologies in doing this. Some of these technologies I know in other groups we're really trying to shut down because of the actual toxic byproducts that they really produce, and also the effects that they have on the environment. So like pyrolysis and your gasification stuff is really classified as incineration, and they need to be classified as an incineration and need to stay that way, because in the end they produce a lot of toxic ash that is very dangerous to the environment. And then you've also got your things like you were talking about with the the concentrated animal feeding operations and doing things with the manure and trying to take care of that. And basically, we just need to stop those operations because those are really bad for the environment. So it's not only just about carbon, it's about what they are doing to the environment beyond just climate change, but the actual environmental damage that they're doing. And so part of this, the questions is also, are you factoring in the environmental damage in all these technologies too? Especially since we don't really even talk about fertilizer. It's used on a lot of these crops that is actually based on petroleum. So that's petroleum is into all of this stuff. So that all has to be looked at.
Yeah, two things. One, yes, we have to replace the whole barrel. No question about it. I was up here in Frederick. I was part of the protesting against the incinerator from the very beginning. And bring that up with whenever I'm talking to people about the gasification. It's what part of it is what goes into that process. And so yeah, what comes out. If you don't have plastics in it, then and the other thing is there's a lot of more. They don't want to waste anything. They're capturing stuff, but absolutely agree on that's an issue, and prefer the other ones, but yeah.
David Saunders.
Very quickly, I understand that when you burn hydrogen, you get water. When you burn ethanol, what do you get? And by the way, thank you very much. I learned a lot from this. I didn't really take biofuels seriously. I always thought it was a President Bush scam that they put through. So thank you so much. But what happens when you burn ethanol? What's the byproduct?
Ethanol also will give you carbon dioxide. And that's why I'm saying that the idea is the recycling the carbon dioxide that we have. So yeah, if you are combusting ethanol in an engine that's designed for gasoline, you're going to get carbon dioxide. You are.
Okay.
Now someday we talk about, like, if you're getting your hydrogen and your feedstock is water, we got lots of issues to talk about water too. So,
Good.
but yeah, once you get the hydrogen, yeah, you get if in the fuel cell, then you're going to get water at the other end.
Hey, Patty.
Hi, thank you. I learned a lot about this as well, so I do really want to thank you for this presentation. I just have kind of like some inputs. I think that we have to look at multiple things in order to get our carbon down. So the biofuels are not the only answer that we would be focusing on. We would have to do the electric cars as well. I think the biofuels will be great for the travel industry, like the airlines and things like that. And the only question I have is are you guys going for the fuel will be completely, because like you in your slides, you were showing that only 20% or so, is things going to be completely this fuel? So that was the one question that I had. Is that the goal, to get rid of completely the petroleum? And the other thing you had mentioned about plastics is that plastics will always be here, but what I would like to see us do is change the plastics and how we make them away from petroleum as well. For instance, this is a bamboo bowl. It's hard. Our computers could be made of this instead of using plastics. I mean, we just need to completely go away from that as well. And the companies can still make money. They just need to switch the products of what they're using to be more environmentally sound. So the question is the goal to get all the vehicles, the airplanes and everything, that they would be just using, the biofuels and not the combinations? So That was
Yeah,
the question I had.
at the moment, there's reasons that that extra part is there, like lubricants or something like that. And so they said, okay, well, we'll do 85% ethanol, and the other part will be, that other stuff you need. But there is no reason that you can't make that other stuff bio also.
Right.
We just haven't gotten there yet. And the same thing with the jet fuel. At this moment, going through that ASTM process, there was one they approved for 10%, and that one's not even being made anymore, but the others they've approved for 50%. They are really working on proving that they can do the whole thing bio. There was a United flight a couple weeks ago that had one engine was completely 100% bio. The other engine was regular petroleum in case something happened, and they knew that would all work. But I mean, it's the same fuel except better. It meets all of the same requirements. It's been tested in the engines and everything else. And so now they are developing recipes, let's say, to make the fuel that you can use at 100%. But they have to go through all of these processes to be able to get it approved for that before they can use it. And that flight was not a commercial flight. It was, people from United and people from the people who developed it, and all of those people who said, yes, we get to fly our fuel. So, yeah, that is true. I can't. What was the other part was?
No, that was my only question. It was just that moving the plastics, I had mentioned about moving away from petroleum to make, materials that can be used for your computers and everything else.
We need to replace the whole barrel. You can't just replace. I mean, the part that they make money on is the chemicals part. You're not going to sell it something for $2 a gallon if you can make more money on it.
Right.
So the fuels are basically what we're doing with the waste from the petroleum. And so we have to replace the fuels, and we have to replace everything else that they
Right. And then I liked when you said for the person about cutting down the trees and deforestation, that probably I'm hoping that doesn't happen either, because that was a concern too. But there should be regulations that will come out that will say that you can't, you have to go and get regulated, and so hopefully, because we know we have to save trees, and we're now knowing that we have to save ancient forests, not just trees, because we can't just go planting and have the same effect of getting the carbon out, because those ancient forests are really very important. So that's the other thing we have to focus on.
You're spot on there, Patty. We have to retain our existing forests and let them grow and sequester carbon and provide all the other myriad benefits that they provide.
Yeah.
So we have time for, we don't really have time for one more question, but I'll take one more question from someone who's not asked a question already, and you have a burning desire to do so. I'll give you 5 seconds. Anyone who hasn't asked a question who would like to? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Joanne, for your presentation. It was very informative, and I'm going to hope that the recording works. I'm going to stop the recording now.